Can you hear me? Can anybody in the back hear me? Well, somebody can, so. Okay, so we're going to try and get started, I think, so that we can get finished on time. I'll let the last few people sit down. So my name's Andrew Clinick. I'm the scripting program manager at Microsoft. And I'm here to talk to you today about Windows script for developers. Now that's an interesting term. We've come up with a new term just to confuse the heck out of you once more. But hopefully this time it will be the last time we change our name, and it should be around for at least 6 months, I imagine. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, just what the heck is Windows script, and then script hosts. Where can you actually use some of this script? My main kind of push in this talk is going to be, well, where can you use these script engines? So if you're VB script developers, then you come to the right place. If you're JScript developers, you come to the right place. If you're C++ developer, maybe you come to the right place, but it's somewhat unlikely. So talk about the Windows script engines, and then something called the Windows script host. How many of you heard of the Windows script host? Wow. All that with no marketing. It's got to be good. And something new called Windows script components. And this is the thing we've renamed more than any other product known to Microsoft so far. So you might not have heard about this, but you might have heard of server scriptlets or XML scriptlets, and some of the many names we gave it. And then some summary and some Q&A. So if we can try and keep the Q&A to the end, I'll get through. I've tried to reduce the amount of slides that I have. I figured you probably could do with demos at 3:15 on the second to last day at TechEd. You've been slided out, I should think. So I'm going to skip that. So what this presentation is not about is using a script to administer your Windows network. So if you're a system administrator, then now's the time to leave and go find something else. I didn't know what time I was going to be on. Go to the administering Windows script session. Well, that'd be interesting because that was on Sunday. So if you missed that, you're screwed. HTML authoring, there's a bunch of IE sessions for that, and also ASP development. Now, everything I'll be talking about is obviously applicable to that, but I'm not specifically going to be talking about the document object model in HTML. I'm not going to be talking about the requests and sessions and things like that in ASP. I have some idea about that, but if you really have any tough questions about that, please don't ask me, because I won't know. If I do, obviously you have to give me a 5 if I can ever answer one of those things. So what is Windows script? Well, it's really like a family of technologies. In the past, we've had ActiveX scripting, we've had Windows script host, we've had scriptlets. We've had about 3 different notions of scriptlets. And there's been a whole bunch of things that really came under one technology platform from Microsoft, but they never really had a decent naming behind it. So we tried to this time is really kind of minimize the name changes and try and give you some idea of, well, all this stuff links together. So we have this family of script technologies called Windows script, funnily enough. So we have Windows script engines, and that would be VB script and JScript. Those are the ones that we provide in Windows. So if you have IE installed, or you have Windows 2000 or Windows 98, then you get those already. Then we have something called the Windows script interfaces. These used to be known as the ActiveX scripting interfaces. I think we were the last group in Microsoft with the term ActiveX, and we had to get rid of it somehow. So we've changed it to Windows script, but it's basically the same thing. Then we have Windows script components, which are this allows you to create COM objects out of XML and script. So in essence now you can create a COM object in Notepad. That was our kind of barrier to entry, is like you have to have Notepad, but then most people have Notepad. So then Windows script host is our batch files comes to Windows. Albeit 6 years late, but batch files have made it to Windows. This is our kind of first and second attempt at trying to make this useful for you. And then so you can help debug these types of things, we have the Windows script debugger, which ships with Windows 2000, freely downloadable from our website, which allows you to step through your code. If you're familiar with Vid, how many of you here use Vid, Visual InterDev? Okay, well, you won't want to use the script debugger because Visual InterDev does a much better job of debugging than the script debugger. But if you don't use Vid, or you want a small, lightweight debugger on a whole bunch of machines out there, then the script debugger is something you might want to take a look at. And then finally, Windows script control, which allows you to use VB script, JScript, or any script engine within your own application. Again, that ships with Windows 2000. So everything up here on the slide all ship with Windows 2000, and for the older versions of Windows, you can freely downloadable. So we're a pretty zero revenue group. So our ship party puts us into kind of the red, but there we go. So what is this whole notion of Windows script? Well, really we want to provide an open platform so that people can use just about any language which they want, within just about any application which they want. Now, obviously, I'm somewhat biased in that my group does VBScript and JScript, and I want to make those the best languages in the world. But if you're a Perl developer, then the chance of me convincing you that VB is the way to go are reasonably slim, I should imagine. So, the idea being is that if you really rely on Perl or Rex or Python, then sure, go ahead and use those languages. And we want to make a way that third parties can plug in, no matter which application they use. So at the moment we have Perl available, Rex is coming out soon, Python is out, and there's some kind of academic languages, Haskell scripts, and I believe that somebody has a Lisp interpreter, but I'm not sure what the market for Lisp is nowadays. So this open architecture, well, how does that actually apply to you? Well, I guess you've all used Internet Explorer and Internet Information services, I guess I should say now. And they use JScript and VBScript. And the way they do that is they talk via these Windows script interfaces to VBScript and JScript, which are just two DLLs on your machine. Now, either one of those applications could easily just talk to Perl, as well as they could do to VBScript. Now, Perl and HTML maybe not a huge kind of scenario, but certainly, if you're a web developer, and you're developing stuff on the server, then the chance of you finding something useful to do in Perl are reasonably high. So you can use Perl in ASP just as you could do VBScript. So any application can use any language. And other examples of this, Windows Script Host is something from my team, but there are a number of third-party applications out there. Currently we have about 15,000 licensed applications externally, and there's quite a few internally from Microsoft. So which ones from Microsoft? So basically every version of Windows since Windows 98 are a Windows Script Host. So Windows 98, Windows 2000, and also Windows CE. So on your Palm PC or your handheld PC, VBScript is on there, as is JScript. So you can use that. Internet Explorer, Internet Information Services, I've already talked about. Exchange uses script, so that you can write some scripts running on the server that you can respond to events. Now, any of you Exchange programmers probably know a whole lot more about that than I do, but I know that Exchange does use it, and they have some pretty cool demos. Systems Management Server 2.0 provides a lot of its functionality by using Windows Script Host, but also using script itself. So if you're using Systems Management Server there. SNA Server, they just had a presentation about this. So you can do some interesting, you want to add some kind of client functionality between your mainframe screen scrape and what actually gets displayed to the user. You can put some script in there and do some interesting things. SQL Server 7.0, which I hope you've all got, well, you can all get the MSDE, right, which is pretty much SQL Server 7.0, has in jobs and data transformation services. Now, data transformation services is kind of an interesting one, because if you're taking something from DB2 and you want to put it into SQL, then maybe you want to do some changes between that. You want to apply some kind of business logic. So you can write some of these things in script. Office 2000 uses script extensively and actually provides a great editing environment for script called the Microsoft Script Editor. Visual Studio 6 provides similar functionality as the Microsoft Script Editor, better debugging, ASP, IE, Commerce Server, and all important is the Precision Kart Racing. This uses script for doing its UI, and it's obviously a major host that you should worry about. But perhaps the most interesting thing is your next application. How many of you are VB developers? How many would say they're developers? What would your number one kind of job as developers? Okay, fair few of you. So there's some interesting stuff which I'll show you at the end, is how you can use VBScript in your VB app or any app. So to get to the meat of the session, what am I here to talk about? Primarily it's about our version 5 engines. Now, version 5 engines shipped with Internet Explorer 5.0. They're also available from our website, which is on msdn.microsoft.com scripting. Don't worry, it's at the end of the presentation. There's a bunch of hyperlinks there. And we like to think this is our major release for VBScript. I've been asked a number of questions recently, is like, well, is Microsoft like just forgetting about VBScript? Should I be learning JScript? And that was a reasonable assumption to make. As you look at JavaScript 3.0, we did a whole bunch of work there, primarily to make it ECMA compliant. ECMA isn't a disease; it's actually a standard for JavaScript. So we're a pretty small team, so we had to work out, well, where we're going to put our resources. So in version 3, which came with IE4, we spent a lot of our time in JScript, and hence not a lot of time in VBScript. That was good, and it was bad. And certainly you guys told us what was bad about it. So we got a lot of feedback as like, well, you have to help VBScript. There's a whole bunch of things that VBScript's lacking in. And we tried to listen this time. So version 5, we like to think as episode 5, VBScript strikes back. This is a chance that VBScript actually does something useful. So I really did a kind of a bullet list on what are the main things there. So what we tried to do was make sure that VBScript and JScript were on the same level, so that from a feature perspective, there should be no reason to choose one over the other. If you prefer JScript, then great, go use JScript. But if you're a VB developer, there should be no reason why you'd have to move to JScript just because it had a new feature. So we're really trying to make sure that we kind of look after the VB development community out there and give you the new features when you need them. So one of the biggest things that people were asking us for was classes. Why can't I create objects in VBScript? And that's a pretty good question. Why couldn't you? And certainly from a lot of our development on the server, people are starting to use objects in JavaScript quite a lot. If you look at Visual InterDev 6.0, it has a whole bunch of design time controls, which relies entirely on JScript on the server. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. One, the developer liked JScript, which was not that great a reason, frankly. But two is that JScript could create objects, and VBScript couldn't. So even if we could convince the developer that really should be using VBScript, but he couldn't at that time. So what we've done is we've added classes to VBScript this time around. Now, those of you who are familiar with VB, you'll realize that classes require a .cls file, so a separate file. Now, obviously in script, we don't know how many files we're going to have, and we can't rely on having a separate file. So we've added the class and class notation into VBScript. So you can create multiple classes in one file. Now, interestingly, this also turns out to be one of the major requests for VB. So in the future versions of VB, you'll see that this will end up going into VB as well. So don't know when that's going to be at the moment, but everything you see here hopefully will be in VB as well. So you can now create objects within VBScript, which is great. Second most asked for feature was the with statement. And so why the hell didn't we have that in the first place? Those of you not familiar with the with statement, it basically allows you to say, with object, and then you can just say dot property name, dot method name. It makes your code a hell of a lot easier to read, and there are some performance improvements on that. So it really helps with your development if you're using lots of objects. How many of you develop in JScript? So those of you developing JScript, hopefully will be reasonably familiar with the concept of eval. Now, eval basically allows you to take a text stream and actually compile that on the fly. So you can redefine how your program is, or you can add new functions to your program at runtime. And this is really interesting from a web development perspective. You might actually send down some different code if it was in Netscape as it was in IE, depending on the object model, that type of scenario. You might send down a class at runtime. So we've added this to VBScript this time around. And there are a number of problems potentially with VB. In JScript, you have the doubles equals operator, which checks to see, evaluates between two expressions. Now, in VB, it has no notions of that. So if I say eval x equals 1, what do I mean? Do I want to assign 1 to x, or do I want to check if x is equal to 1? It's pretty ambiguous in VB. So what we have is we have eval. So if I say eval x equals 1, then it will return me true or false. But if I say execute, I will be able to say, if I say execute x equals 1, then it will assign the value of 1 to x. Now, interestingly, execute also allows you to basically paste in the program. So I could say execute sub-foo, colon, message box hello world, colon, end sub. And now sub-foo would be available to the rest of my program to use. So you can do some pretty interesting things there and change the way your program behaves at runtime. Now, regular expressions. So how many of you are familiar with regular expressions? How long have you been asking for those in VB? at least like 6 years, most people are telling me. So finally we've added regular expressions to VB. And we've added both VBScript and VB. And the way we've done that is we've taken the Perl 5 regular expression syntax. I think this is the first time that Microsoft didn't try and redefine how the regular expression syntax should work. We're like, okay, well, Perl seems to have that pretty well sorted out, so we'll just use that. And what we've done is we've provided a COM object, which basically doesn't mess with VB. Perl users out there, they have competitions, who can write the most unreadable code, which is interesting, but really that kind of goes against the grain with VB. You're meant to be able to just read VB. So the last thing I want to do is mess with VB this time around. So we provided an object model, which I'll show you briefly in a minute, that hopefully you'll find reasonably VB friendly. So you execute a regular expression against a string, and it returns you a collection of objects. So it's the typical VB programming model, as opposed to being able to just stick a regular expression straight into my program. And we've actually added this as a COM object, so if you install VBScript 5, you can use exactly the same syntax in VB6 today. So it's a good reason to install VBScript 5. Final three are reasonably small ones. In Internet Explorer, there's a specific way of being able to do event hookup, which is very JavaScript specific. But it also turns out to be the fastest way to do it. And we wanted to make sure that there was no reason, speed wasn't one of the reasons why you went to JScript. So we've added the notion of function pointers into VBScript. I won't go through it right now, I'll show you in the demo. It's a little easier to explain than the demo. Finally, set locale. So how many of you program multinational sites? Okay, not many of you. Well, the interesting thing is that in Internet Explorer, it sets the locale of your HTML page to be English, regardless of where you are. Now, this is good and bad. The good thing is it means your web page is going to work the same on every single country, and that's good if you're developing a web page. The bad thing is say you're developing a web page and you're doing an expense reporting web page, and you want to take input from a German machine. Well, it turns out that the German decimal point is a comma. So if I type in 12,00, in German I actually meant that was 12. But in IE it's going to say, oh well, that's 12,000. Now that's pretty stupid really if you're trying to develop some German stuff. So we've added set locale to VBScript, which allows you to set the locale of the engine to whatever locale you're trying to get. So I'll show you a demo of that. But this makes doing multinational stuff pretty easy. And then finally, encode and decode allows you to encode text streams to go through HTML. So, and this is really interesting if people are using cookies. Currently it's pretty difficult to deal with cookies in VBScript, primarily for this reason. So we've added a lot to VBScript 5 this time. We haven't completely forgotten about JScript 5. We're working very closely with the ECMA body, and what that basically means is that about 4 of us from Microsoft meet up with about 4 people from Netscape and IBM and Hewlett-Packard once a month. We all kind of get on. We go out and have a beer. No marketing people are allowed, no lawyers, so we actually get on pretty well. And the idea being is that we develop JScript, JavaScript in conjunction, so that if you're developing JavaScript, there should just be one standard to do it, rather than having to go work out what's working in Netscape, what's not. So we're working on version 2 right now. And the main thing on version 2 was basically standardizing what we did in the version 4 browsers, but also adding exception handling to JavaScript. JavaScript never had any way to trap errors. And funnily enough, this was a design decision back in 1994 when JavaScript was being designed. Because if an error happened, well, it would just happen and the user would deal with it. And that's one way of designing a language. It's perhaps not the best way to design a language. So we now have try-catch finally. If you're familiar with Java or C++, then this should work exactly the same way as it does in those 2 languages. Unfortunately, it doesn't really make for a great demo, so I don't have a demo on that. But be happy in the knowledge that there's now try-catch finally to JavaScript. Certainly, if you're developing on the server, that makes a huge difference. And we were 99.9999% compatible with ECMA 262 in version 3. We've since found a few small bugs which hopefully should make no difference whatsoever to your script, so we've just fixed some of those in JScript 5. So we've added a lot to the languages this time around. But adding language features, well, that kind of helps you, but your problems right now are performance. You need your ASP to run faster, you need your browser to run faster. So we spent a lot of time working with the IE and the IIS teams to make sure we could run faster. So in the browser, JavaScript runs pretty fast. We're, in some respects, significantly faster than Netscape. In others, perhaps not. But pretty much we're doing pretty well with JavaScript. VBScript, the report card wasn't so good. VBScript 3 really wasn't the fastest implementation we possibly could. For example, say you had a 100 by 100 table. So that's a fair amount of cells in there. And you just wanted to respond to the event on the very last cell in the bottom right-hand corner. Well, VBScript 3 would go through every single one of those cells in the table. And hence was pretty slow. So it would go ask every cell, do you have any events to respond to? And they would say, well, no. But there's these few that I might have in the future. So it would go through each one. That wasn't really the greatest design we could have come up with. So in VBScript 5, if you just have one cell that has an event that you want to respond to, then we only ask that cell. So in some respects, VBScript 5 is 100 times faster than VBScript 3. I'm not really talking about that huge amount because that's just because we did a bad job in VBScript 3 and we're doing a good job in VBScript 5. But it should make a significant difference to your page load times. VBScript is people use it on the client, but pretty much where most people are using it is on the server. So we spent a lot of time with the IIS team. We spent about 3 months working out how we can make script faster, both JavaScript and VBScript faster on the server. We worked very closely with the Windows 2000 team and the IIS team. And we've done a number of improvements. For example, we now early bind to the response.write method and the response.write block, which every single ASP page uses. No matter what you put in your ASP page, there's going to be a response.write block in there. And we've done a lot of work with our string handling or whatever. What that actually means to you is that by installing Windows 2000, which has the version 5 script engines, we're seeing up to 3 times performance improvement without any changes in your code. Now, this really, really, really helps with ASP. Now, those of you not running Windows 2000, if you install SP5 and the version 5 engines, then you will see some performance improvements. Nowhere close to 3 times, unfortunately, but we really had to go back to the basics in Windows 2000 and make sure we did the right thing there. But we really helped with performance on that. So what we're finding is people are starting to develop a lot more in script. And this is great if you're doing your own internal development. But say you're actually developing a solution and you want to sell it to somebody, or you want to deploy it to 10,000 desktops out there. One of the good and the bad things, I guess, about its script is that you can take a look at the source. You can just say view source and somebody can take a look at it because it's in Notepad and just change it. Well, this is interesting because one, if you're trying to sell something, then selling your source with your source freely available is probably not that great a business decision. Because people just come along and rip off your code. And that's great if you want to do that. But if you want to protect it, it's very, very difficult in script. And also, we're finding is that from a lot of support places, this is making it very difficult. Site server, for example, ships 30,000 lines of ASP. Well, they were getting support calls saying, well, site server just stopped working. I didn't change anything. And you're like, well, if they didn't change anything and it was working yesterday but not today, then something's gone wrong. And it turns out that they've decided to optimize the code. They've taken out that x shouldn't equal 1, it should equal 25. Well, they've completely deleted the line. Now, I'm sure you found this if you're trying to roll out your applications. You roll it out to the finance department and they decide, well, I'm going to optimize this code. And it's always the finance department that want to optimize your code. And of course, it just stops working and you have no idea what's going on. So we've come up with something called script encoding, which hopefully addresses some of those issues. What it does is basically allows you to protect your code against prying eyes. So it takes your script code, runs it through a reasonably simple text cipher, base64 encodes it, and then checksums it and writes it back into your script block. So for the casual user, they'll just take a look at it and go, well, what the hell is that? I can't understand what that is. It's reasonably strange to look at, and I'll show you some of the demos. Now that's to say you shouldn't rely completely on this. It's pretty easy to crack. I'm sure that people have cracked it already. But the point is really to introduce a step so that you can sue people when it comes down to it. Is that, if somebody looks at your code in Notepad, then it's pretty difficult to prove that they actually stole your code. But if they've had to go through a decompile or de-encoding step, then it's pretty easy to prove that. So you should develop in code. We have some tools to provide the encoding for you, and then deploy. The key thing is to encode a copy. Don't encode your original because there's no way back. So, and people have done that, so I really don't recommend you do that. So the decoding is supported in the engines. We have two new engines, vbscript.encode and jscript.encode. Those are the only two engines that know how to decode this encoded script. We chose two new engine names so that your existing clients, so if somebody's running IE4 and they look at your web page, it's not going to give them any errors. It will just ignore that because IE4 doesn't know anything about vbscript.encode. And we support it in both ASP, HTML, Windows Script for Windows Script host, Windows Script components, and JScript and VBScript for .js and .vbs files. So that's enough of me talking. How about some demos? Okay. Is it up? Okay. So some of the V5 features. Let's have a quick look here. So this demo is actually written by one of my developers, and I'm just going to increase the font size so you can see that, because that's pretty small. And that's not much bigger, but anyway. So it just says Eric Lipper earns 50,000. Well, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the source on here. Now the key thing that we've done here is we've used the classes in VBScript. So here I have a class employee, I have a public first and last name property, and I have a private member called salary, which I don't want to expose out there. Now, I also want to expose a full name property, but I want to make this read-only. So I have here property get full name. So if you're familiar with VB, this should be identical as VB. So I now have a full name, and whenever somebody tries to get that full name property, it just concatenates first name and last name. Stunning stuff. I then have a read-write property, and I actually want to run some code when somebody accesses this property. So I have a salary, and it takes in what the new salary is, and it just does some bounds checking to make sure that it's all going to work. So it just checks to see if it's greater than or less than 0, and then sets the internal member to be whatever it's been passed in. And then I do a get, which just passes out the information. Then I have two methods on here. I have an add, because we have to be able to add users on this. I just set the first and last name. And then I have a raise salary, because the most important thing if you're going to design an employee class is having a raise salary method. So in my code, I just say dim person, and I say set person equals new employee. So those who are familiar with VB, we now introduce the new operator. So this basically creates me a new instance of that employee class. I can then say with person, and then say .add. Now, if you're not familiar with this is exactly the same as me saying person.add. But it just saves you typing, makes your code look nicer, and we can actually do there's some performance gains here, because we don't have to go and look up person every time. Whereas if I had these two lines, we'd have to go and look at what the person object was, does it have an add method? But we now know at the top that it's with the person object, so there are some performance improvements there. So I say add Eric Lipper, salary equals 50,000, and then I just do a document.write, full name, earns.salary, and break, and that results in this. So this is a reasonably interesting demo. Oh, one final thing. I think it's in the next demo. So one thing I want to do is, well, this just shows me the information, but I want to be able to change this information because I want to develop this web page for my boss. So, nice, simple, big buttons so the boss can raise your salary. It's very important they can do that. So here we go. Eric Lipper earns 50,000, but we're going to give him a raise, so we keep going up. He's doing a good job, so he deserves 85. So let's have a look at this. So if we do a view source, basically the same class. And I now have a subroutine called raise. And I say person.salary.raise salary 5,000. So it's going to raise it in 5,000 increments. And then I just do that. I just set them in a text of the person.full name now earns person.salary. Now, those of you familiar with VB and certainly VBScript and HTML, this isn't how you would have done it in IE4. You would have had button1 _ onClick, and then you would have the function in there. Now, that still works, but the performance improvements are not, you're going to get a lot of performance improvements there, but the fastest way to do it is by using these function pointers, which I was talking about. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can say button1.onClick equals, in this case, raise. And JavaScript has this notion of first-class objects. So it goes, oh, well, what you actually mean is just give me a pointer to that function. Now, of course, in VB, it doesn't work that way. If I said button1.onClick equals raise, it would actually run raise for me, which is the last thing I want it to do. And certainly, IE is not expecting the result of the raise function to come in there. So we have this new thing called getRef. And now this has an interesting history of what this function was going to be called. Originally, it was called create function pointer. But then kind of usability suggested that, well, really, that's a lot of typing. So we thought, well, get reference. And that was okay, it was shorter, but eventually we thought getref would be a nice short way so you don't have to type all this stuff. So here I can say set button1.onClick equals getref, in quotes, raise. And what that will do is create me an object with a default property set to the raise method. And that's then handed off to IE. Now, this is really interesting if you're developing web pages and you add objects at runtime. Previously in VB, if you added an object after the page was run, there's no way you could bind to that event with events off that object in VB script. Now using this function you can. You can use getref and it will assign it dynamically at runtime. So, let's just take a quick look here. So, you've probably noticed I'm not from America. So, and nor's Eric, funnily enough. So I want to be able to raise this, but I don't know, what's $85,000 in real money? So if I click on convert, there's 50,000. Well, that's doing pretty well. So how did I do this? Well, again, I have class employee, and I do the basic stuff. But I've now added another button here called convert. And down the bottom, I've actually set getref to be convert. And what I do in the convert function is I use the new regular expression features in VB. Now, obviously, this is probably not the best use of regular expressions, and I don't recommend you use it just to convert from one salary to another, but it's a demo, so what the hell. So here I just declare some variables, and then I say, well, set re equals new regex. And what this does is VB knows that there's a VBScript.regular expression object, and it's built into VBScript. So it's a built-in class in VB. So it's now created me a new instance of the regular expression engine. And I'm going to get the text of the document. And then what I'm going to do is set the pattern on my regular expression object. Now, those of you who are familiar with Perl will think this is wonderful. Those of you who've never seen Perl before will wonder, what the hell are we thinking giving you this? But it takes a little while, but it's worth it in the end. So basically what I want to do is look for a word and a space, then a word. So if you notice back here when I click on raise, if I click on raise, and when I click on convert, it changes Eric Lippert to italics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, run the replace method, which will use that pattern. And what it will do is replace all the text in that particular string with, and it will put the emphasis tag in front of it, and it will put $1, which will be the first word, and then $2, which will be the second word, and then replace it with, and then put another emphasis on it. So that's how it gave me the italics. And Eric is going to England next week to VBits in England. So this is why we thought that the conversion would work reasonably well. So what we want to do is be able to find the digits that are in that page. So in this case, all I'm worried about is the first set of digits. So I'll set the pattern, and I'm going to look for some digits. And then what I'm going to do is execute that expression on that text string. And what it will do is it'll find me every single one of instances that apply to that pattern. So if I had multiple digits in there, it would find those. But in this case, I know there's just one set of digits started with a $sign. So what it does is it returns me a collection of matches. And then all I'm doing is saying, well, pounds equals match.value times whatever today's exchange rate is. And in this case, I know there's only going to be one, so it's obviously a somewhat contrived demo. But this is kind of interesting if you want to go through and find a whole bunch of, maybe you're going through news groups and you want to get rid of some of that spam, and you want to check if there's any profanities used through any of those things. You could just loop through all the news groups and have this expression that found all these profanities in there for you. And then I just do a set inner HTML, and I just do, again, a replace using the same expression, and then what I'm going to do is just put a bold tag, put the pound sign in, and then the conversion. So regular expressions really allow you can almost think of regular expressions to strings as math is to numbers. You can kind of do all this kind of cool stuff on strings now. And if you go buy a regular expression book, which I highly recommend, there's a good one from O'Reilly, Mastering Regular Expressions, and it goes through all this arcane syntax for you. But hopefully you'll find that reasonably useful. So one last look at something here. So this is the locale setting stuff. So I have a US machine on here, but I'm in UK and well, everywhere else in the world seems to go day, month, year, but apart from here. So I always get confused by that. So being Y2K compliant, I'm going to give a four-digit date, and 24th of May, yesterday. So let's see what that is in the US equivalent. And it comes back and shows me. Likewise, if I put in, that is a comma, I'm not sure you can see that. So I put in 12,00, and what's that in the UK equivalent? And that gives me, well, that's £12, exactly. Now to show you how that works, so I dim the current locale, and I get the current locale by calling the getLocale function. That will give me whatever my current locale was set to at the beginning of the program. In my button1.onClick, what I'm going to do is just dim the original, and I'm going to say original equals setLocale en-gb. Now, setLocale will take an LC ID, which is a number. Now, for the life of me, I can't remember what the number is for the UK, but en-gb is reasonably useful, and I can grab that from the user agent of the browser. So it's a somewhat easier way to do it, and we provide a full list of what locales are available in our help. And then I'm just going to set the date, and I just say, well, at this point, I've now changed the locale of my script engine to be English, and all I have to do is say my date equals convert date of UK date.value, and then I just change it back, and I set locale equals the current locale, which is always going to be English, and then I say, well, US date equals format date time, my date, which is we've just set to a date up here, and then VB short date. And because it's now been set back to the US locale, it knows to do the right thing. And it's pretty much identical down here for setting the locale for Germany. So I just do a set locale to be DE, and then I do a currency conversion of German number.value, and then I set locale to English UK, and then I just do a format currency, and it does the right thing. So set locale is a pretty nice way of being able to deal with multiple locales on your machine. And quickly, because I'm taking more time than I thought I would, let's take a look at some of the encoder features. So here's this one which we've seen before, and I just do a view source on that. So just to prove that you can read all the class information. So if I go back on here and launch a command line, now the scripting group is a group that really doesn't have much UI. So this is our first attempt at doing UI, so you have to bear with us, and eventually we'll get UI right. So what we have is we have a little runtime utility called Skrrank, a nice name, scripting encoder. And what I'm going to take is m3.htm, and I'll just call that TechEd.htm, because I don't want to call it the same thing. So I click enter, and wow, great UI. We really worked hard on that. You'll be pleased to know that there is an object which you can use, which is the scripting.encoder, and all this command line utility does is just calls that for you. But you can say screnc star.htm to start, encode whack star.htm, and it'll go through the whole directory and do that for you. So here I have teched.htm, and hopefully it does the same thing. But if I do a view source on this time, then things are looking somewhat strange. So if I word wrap, it's now taken that script block where it said class or whatever, it's changed the name to vbscript.encode, and, well, it's pretty much made it look like garbage to most people. And the key thing is at the beginning there's a checksum, so even if I decided that, well, let's have a look. S plus tilde is really the wrong thing because I'm in the finance department and I know much better than developers. So I'm going to delete that. It's just not going to work. I can save it back to all I want to do and nothing's going to work. So the key thing here is it provides you some protection. People can't just go look at your code. If you're developing logon scripts, you don't want people to go find out what's in there. In your ASP code, maybe you have passwords in there. Don't recommend that. This isn't really going to help you, but it'll at least give you some form of protection against that. So that's encoding, and that all ships with version 5. So let me switch back to my slides. Okay, so it's a brief overview on what's new in the V5 script engines. What we want to do is really kind of expand where you might use script today. Microsoft has always had this story as that code plus components is going to help you build really great solutions, and it's worked out pretty well. And specifically on ASP. But say you're an ASP developer and you use JScript, or you use Perl, or maybe you use VBScript, and you bought into this code plus component story. So you write your code in script, but then to create a component, you have to go either learn a completely different language or go buy a completely different development tool. Now, if you're a VB developer, then that's probably no big deal because you have VB and that's a great way of doing it. But for those other languages, we really want to provide a nice, lightweight environment so that people could develop COM objects using script. So we come up with something called Windows Script Components. Now, Windows Script Components are just COM components written in script and XML. Now, the reason we've introduced XML is that, well, one, it's the coolest thing there is out there right now, and everybody knows about XML, right? But two, is that we had to have a whole bunch of information that's not available in script. And we could have invented our own kind of pragma language, our own kind of meta information, and you would have had to learn another way to do it. Or we could just go use XML, which every tool seems to be supporting from now on. So just with the combination of script and some reasonably simple XML, which I'll show you in a minute, you can now create a COM component. Now these COM components can be used anywhere with COM can today. Your applications don't have to know anything about script. So on the client, you can use them in Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer 5.0 introduces the notion of DHTML behaviors. So you can create safe script components for use in IE5. And your script components will inherit the security context of your web page. So if your web page allows unsafe things, which I highly discourage you from doing, you should never do that. But if you have allowed that, then the script and the component will run exactly the same way as script in the HTML page. You can use it from within WSH, which is kind of interesting. But then any COM application, be that your VB app, Word, Excel, whatever. And on the server, from our primary scenario was from Internet Information Server, so you can create some nice simple scripts there. But again, from any COM application. And by any COM application, obviously we need to be able to support Microsoft Transaction Server. So you can now create MTS-aware components in Notepad. And these things are really pretty small. If you think about what you want to create an MTS component, you want it to be small and stateless, pretty much what you want to do. Well, saving to state is pretty difficult in script because it has no way of talking to the file system easily. And, well, script is pretty small. Our Windows script component runtime is only 100K. So you can create some pretty small applications here, which really help with the scalability. And we worked a lot to make sure that we do all the caching just right and that kind of information. And finally, it's important this runtime is everywhere. So it's built into Windows 2000, it's built into IE5, and it's also available for older versions of Windows from our website. You can just go download it. And VBScript 5, JScript 5 components and the script host, it's about a 600K download, so it's pretty small. We try to make sure that we did our stuff as small as possible. So I think we're on the few groups in Microsoft where we still fit in the floppy, like all 6 products. So this XML-based object definition, is this going to be difficult? We try to make it as simple as we possibly could. So for a component, you want to be able to define methods, properties, and events. A few other things, but primarily that's what it's there for. So we have a method element, a property element, and an event element. So here I have method, name equals method1. I'm now going to have a method called method1 exposed on my object, and it will automatically call through to a function called method1 in my script. Likewise, with a property, I can say property name equals prop1. I'm going to have that property. And depending on whether I put a get or a put element within that, I can determine whether they're read-only or read-write only even. So if I wanted the read-only property, I just wouldn't have the put element in there. And then finally for events, all I have to do is say event name equals event1, and that event is then exposed for my component. Now, registration is something which is fairly key on any COM component. So it's important that we can register any of these COM components so that any existing COM application can just use these and never know that it's a script, really. So, I mean, the good thing about Windows script components is people don't really know that you're only a script developer. It's like, they don't know what you're running. Might be a little slower, but it's kind of nice. You can play with the big boys now. So the key thing is that people are doing this in Notepad, and, well, generating a class ID is not something which Notepad is really good at. And generating a class ID is not something which is that user-friendly either. So what we do is we have a registration element, and the only thing we absolutely require is a prog ID, because pretty much people are going to be creating you via prog ID. So if you just say registration in this case, I have a prog ID myfactorial.component, and if I just closed off my registration tag there and ran this thing through regserve32, or just right-clicked on it and said register, it would create me a class ID on the fly. So if you don't know how to create a class ID, then you're safe. You don't have to do anything. There's a nice simple way. Just create your own prog ID, and it will generate the correct class ID. So the class ID is generated for you. Now, you can put one in if you want. And if you're going to use these things with VB projects, then I recommend you do that. Because VB actually stores the class IDs. So if you're having, there's 2 or 3 developers on the same project, and we add a reference to Andrew's scriptlet, then the class ID on my machine might be different from somebody's on somebody else's machine. So you want to be able to change that. So being able to use it from any COM object is pretty key. But one of the things that make ASP really great is that you can just copy up basically a text file onto your web server, and you can just use it. You don't have to go through any process of registering anything. This is really great for internet service providers and also for your deployment mechanisms. So wouldn't it be nice if you could create a COM object just from a URL? And Windows script components allow you to do that. So I can say get object script : and then just give it the URL of my script component. The script component runtime will go download that from wherever it is and create you an instance of that component. So you never have to register it on your machine. So you can just copy it up to your server and you're done. So here's a brief example of a script component. So everything is bounded by a component tag. I then have my registration, which you saw before. And then I have my method. In this case, I just have a method. And I want to make this publicly available. So we have a public element, and then all your methods, properties, and events live in there. So in this case, I just have a factorial, which is the external name for my method. And then the internal name is going to be my factorial. Now, the reason we gave you this is you might have some existing script which has some arcane naming convention on the functions, but you want to provide a somewhat simpler, easier to use external mechanism. So in this case, it's just going to do the mapping for me. So whenever somebody calls the factorial method, it will actually call down through to my factorial, the function. And in this case, I'm just going to take one parameter and name of n. And I just close off the method and close off public. And then to actually put the script into my component, basically what we did was took a look at what HTML and ASP did and figured, well, why don't we just use that? So we have a script tag which works in exactly the same way as HTML and ASP. So I could say script language equals JScript in this case, or I could have a source equals if I wanted to do an include. And then I have a function, myFactorial, and then I just do some stuff and then just return back the factorial. So pretty simple. So I've now created my COM object, and I'll show you an example, but how can I actually use this on my server-side scenarios? One of the things we want to be able to do is basically people to make components out of their ASP pages. So you could just take your code from an ASP page, cut it into a WSC, and it would work. You wouldn't have to do any changes whatsoever. So the way we've done that is we've actually linked in directly to the MTS runtime. So if I wanted to get at the MTS, the ASP intrinsic objects from perhaps a VB component or without any of this support, then I would do something similar to the code at the top. I would create an object, NTX app server, I would get the object context, And then I would have to go and specifically say, I want to get, current object context response.write. I have to do a lot of changes to my code. Well, with Windows script components, the release version, all you have to do is say implements type equals ASP, make that the default, and then basically that loads in the magic that talks to MTS and provides all the response request server objects you'd expect in ASP. So I can now cut and paste my code from an ASP page straight into a COM component, just save it as a file, and you're done. No changes required. So let's show you a demo. I don't want to save those changes, so let's close some of this stuff down. So I'll just take a look at this customer.asp. Now again, my developer wrote this, and I have no idea where he came up with these names, but this is now loading up IIS on my machine. And apparently Rupert, I don't know, he's from Canada, what can I say? He came up with this stuff. So basically I'm just calling through to an ASP page, and it's getting some credit limit and adjusting my credit limit. Big deal. So I take a look at my ASP page. And what I have here is some simple code. So hopefully most of you are familiar with ASP. Some simple VB script code. So I just declare a customer variable, and I set customer equals server.createObject of customer. Now customer is a Windows script component, which I'll show you in a moment. I say customer.name equals, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, and then I set the credit limit to be 10,000. And then I call the display method on this Windows script component. And that's what's actually writing out the information to the ASP, which you saw back here. If you notice, in the ASP page, there's no response.write. There's no, this customer has this much customer information. I then do one response.write after the credit was adjusted. I then call the raise credit method of 10,000, and then I just call display again. So let's take a look at the component. So here's my component. So I have my component element which contains everything. And I then have some options. I can turn on error checking and turn on debugging. And then I have a registration. In this case, to show you this is all you need, I just have registration prog ID equals customer. And then I have my public stuff. And then I have a property which equals name, credit limit, which these are both read-write. Then I have a method called raise credit and the amount. And then I have a method name of display, and that's not going to have any parameters coming in. And then I have a nice comment in here which gives you some information. All these samples are going to be available on our website and also on the post conference CD. So we try to give you a few comments to work out what the hell was going on as we were going along. Here's the magic line, implements ASP, which provides me with all the object context. And I just do some get name, set name, pretty boring. And then I change my credit limit, and I do a raise credit. And the key thing here is the display, and I just say response.write, and then customer, ampersand name, ampersand credit limit. And that automatically communicates with IIS, says, oh, okay, well, what's my object context? Write this back. So it means you can just take the code and run it, and you don't have to make any changes whatsoever. So it really makes life a little bit easier if you want to create components. So a couple of other small component stuff. So one of the things I was talking about is this ability to use components as COM objects without having to register them. So I haven't shown you Windows script host yet, but here's a nice simple little VB script file. And what it's going to, I declare two variables, and I say x equals input box, enter the name of the string you want to reverse. And I say, well, set rev equals get object, and then script colon, and then where I want this component, where this component is actually located. Now this could be to a web server, but in this case it happens to be onto my local machine. And then I call message box, and I call the reverse method on that script component. So let's see if that works. And what I'm going to do, I hope, is run this through the script debugger so you can see what's going on. Um, so if I say no reg.vbs, so it loads up. No, it's come into the script debugger, and unfortunately I can't change the fonts in the script debugger, but then it's free, so what the hell. Go by Visual Interdev if you want to be able to change the fonts, I'm afraid. So I can flick through, and it's now asking me for what string. So, well, welcome to Dallas. I click OK, and I step through this, and it's going to come back here, click on F8, and it's going to go through, and I've then created the component. When I click on reverse, what I've now done is just stepped into my reverse component. So anywhere where VBScript or JScript is used on your machine, you can step between the different applications that are using it. In this case, I just have a simple reverse function that just does a stro reverse, end that function, and it's come back and it's message boxed that for me. So you can now create components that you don't have to register at all. And also something which is really quite difficult right now is, say you create a component you use on the web server, and you realize you've got a bug. So you need to go change something within that. Now, at the moment, what you have to do is go through to your server, unload that DLL. Maybe that means shutting down your server and updating it, and maybe re-registering it, copying the DLL up there. Well, Windows script components, all you have to do is just copy the new text file, and automatically it goes, oh, well, that file's changed. I'll just reload that into the cache. So it deals with those upload scenarios pretty well for you. So that's it. That's a brief demo of Windows script components. DHTML behaviors are also kind of cool, but I'll leave that to the IE folks to show you. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through Windows script host because we don't have a huge amount of time. Basically, its batch files come to Windows. So WSH 1.0 shipped with Windows 98 and the NT4 option pack, and also with Internet Explorer 5.0. This allows you to run VBScript, JScript, Perl from the command line or from the actual Windows shell. And it gives you a bunch of objects that allow you to talk to the network, be able to create shortcuts, that type of scenario. WSH 1.0 was a good attempt. It perhaps wasn't Microsoft's finest product. So we've spent a lot of time talking to most of our users out there, and they've been fairly vocal in their feelings on WSH 1.0. And WSH 2.0 is something which we're a lot prouder of. And this ships in Windows 2000, but it will also be downloadable for other platforms as well. We feel, obviously, we want everybody to go to Windows 2000, but that's going to take you a while. So it's important you can use this on some of your older platforms as well. So WSH 2.0 really addresses our top 4 user requests. We only had about a month to do this, so we spent a lot of time doing this. So we have includes, because if you have a common set of functions, how on earth do you use those if you can't include? So I can now include a common set of functions into my application. I can get type library constants. How many of you used ADO or CDO? Have you seen how many constants they have? It's like you want to open up a record set, and read only is like 35,320. Well, okay, how am I meant to know that? Well, the best thing is that ADO provides those as constants. So wouldn't it be nice if I just open the record set with ADO read only, or whatever it's defined as? So now we provide that support in WSH, so you can get those constants without having to go and include a whole bunch of things. We also provide support for multiple engines. What we're finding is that people may be migrating from Perl, and they have a whole bunch of Perl functions that do a lot of features for them, and they don't want to go and rewrite all those into VBScript today. So wouldn't it be nice if you could call Perl functions from within VB and just be able to go between multiple languages? Well, Windows Script Host 2 allows you to do that. So you can call between VBScript, JScript, Perl, and all between each other. So you can take your existing library of Perl functions and use them from within VB. Now, there's a slight downside to that, is that you're now loading 2 engines where you could be loading 1, so your memory footprint's going to be going up. But hopefully that'll make your migration process somewhat easier to deal with. And then finally, one major piece of feedback we got was that really Notepad doesn't cut it as an authoring environment. It'd be kind of nice if Microsoft actually provided some kind of solution to help with that, or third-party tools provided a solution for that. So we worked hard to make sure whatever we do can be used within tools today and hopefully with new tools tomorrow. So let's give you a quick show of Windows Script Host 2. Okay. So you'll be pleased to know that the way that we've done all this information, all this new stuff, is via XML again. And what we've done is we've tried to keep the XML schema almost identical to that of Windows Script Components. And actually Windows Script Host 2 uses the same runtime as Windows Script Components. So everything you learn in Windows Script Components pretty much applies to Windows Script Host. And you should get the same error messages that, if errors happen, then at least they're going to happen, consistently across our products for a change. So let's take a look at Windows Script Host. So just some simple ones that actually kind of make sense, that show some stuff. Say you wanted to find out what environment variables are on your machine. So in this case, so I'm just clicking on the VBS file, and I've decided to start mine up as a command line. I can click on this, and it just provides me with all the environment variables that are on my machine. So imagine you're writing a logon script, or just some kind of batch process that you want to be able to deal with. You want to find out, where the home drive is, where the home path is, what my computer name is, all that kind of information. And then it keeps going on, and it kind of loops off. So that's a reasonably simple one. But what about if I wanted to create a shortcut that's running on my machine? I want to create a shortcut to Notepad on my desktop. You're writing a logon, maybe part of your setup routines. You want to create a shortcut to your new application. So let me just click on this, shortcut.vbs. Or not, as the case may be. Okay. So, and just to show you what's going on. So this is now launching through the debugger. This is one of the new features in Windows Script Host 2, is that now you can just start up your script through the debugger without having to go edit it, so you can actually find out what's going on. And I'm going through here, and I'm just going to step over the welcome. It's going to come through and ask me some information. Yes, that's okay. In this case, it's just going to do a create object of wscript.shell, which is one of these the objects which we provide for you. And it's going to find out the special folders. How many of you, it's pretty difficult to work out where the desktop is, because people can change it, it could be anywhere. So all I have to do is say, well, find me the special folders desktop, and it will find that no matter where it is, I hope, and actually give you a pointer to that folder. So that folder could be out on a network drive. My offline files are not working, thank you. Great. And then what I'm going to do is just create a shortcut, and it's going to create me a shortcut to Notepad. And then I want to take the environment strings and find out where the Windows directory is. Go through this, create Notepad, again take the Windows directory. The Windows style, I just want it to be the default, kind of open up. And then find out where the icon location, maybe I want a different icon. And then I'm just going to save that. So hopefully. And now a shortcut to Notepad's been created on my machine. And it's going to tell me that a shortcut's been created to Notepad on my machine, which is very nice of it. So Windows Script Host 1.0 provides you some information on that. For Windows Script Host 2.0, we've provided an XML file format, and I can edit this. And I can edit this in Notepad. And you notice I now have job instead of component, so I can have multiple jobs within one file. And I have a script language equals VBScript. And with Office 2000, there's something kind of nice, which I'm not going to show right now, is the Microsoft Script Editor. I can load up. Let me show you. I'll show you very quickly. I can load up a .ws file within that. And this works, and this is exactly the same as Visual InterDev. I'll show you. It comes with a nice little script editor. Just going to take forever to load. I hope not. Okay, and I'm going to open a file. And you notice it color codes all my XML for me, it color codes all my script. And what I have here is an object tag, ID equals FSO, and I give it the prog ID, we took a look at the class ID stuff in HTML and realized that maybe finding out the class ID for an object was somewhat difficult. So you can now just say the prog ID. And within my code, I can say FSO dot, and it does all the autocomplete on that particular object for me. So if you're familiar with VB, you've got much of the features you've got in VB. It's now available in the Microsoft Script Editor or Visual InterDev 6. So this is all about using Windows Script outside of your application, but what about inside your application? Is that I can drive your application if it has early automation support, but wouldn't it be nice if you could have your own little script language running within your application, much like IE or Outlook? And we provide a mechanism to do that. You can use the Windows Script interfaces. They're not for the faint of heart. If you know C++ or Java, then you're set. But we realize a lot of people don't know C++ and Java, but we want to be able to use this. So we provide something called the Windows Script Control. Now this comes with Visual Studio 6.0. It's in the add-ons folder. You have to install it separately. But it also ships with Windows 2000. And if you don't have any of those, it's also free from our scripting website. And what it does is it provides you with a Visual Basic friendly interface onto these COM interfaces. And also, whilst it does that, provides you with an abstraction. So the idea behind this is that adding script to your application, you should be able to do it in 3 lines of code, which makes it much, much easier to use. And so pretty much those 3 lines of code is what we really wanted to do, is that there's a lot of VB apps out there. You might want to use VBA, which is great, but a lot of people are not wanting to use VBA because you only have like a 1 megabyte application, and maybe VBA is just a bit too much for your application. If you're a Visio or Word, then obviously that makes a lot of sense. So we wanted to be able to add a fairly simple macro language to your application. Now, those are the good things. The bad things are, if you want to do this on the server, then don't use the Windows Script Control. It's not designed for that. That's not to say it won't work. It just doesn't really use script in the way it's designed to work on the server. So you don't really have the control over the caching, of being able to clone engines, being able to launch on multiple threads. So you have much more limited control over the engines. There's also no smart debugging features. And what I mean by this is that if you add script to your application, you'll be able to debug it. But there's no way you can turn off people being able to debug it. There's no way you can set like your application title. So there's some features which you'll want to be able to do using the smart debugging. If you want to do that, unfortunately the script control doesn't support that right now. You have to use the script interfaces. But that's more on the kind of more advanced use of the script control. So let's go to a quick demo. Okay. Close this down. So I'm going to load up VB6. And I've got a much fuller demo, which I'm not going to show you right now, but which will also be available on the demo CD. So I have a simple form here, and I have a text box on it. So this is my version of the Notepad. So I'm going to add a couple of buttons. And this one I'm going to call it Edit. This one I'm going to call it Run. Okay, so I'm going to set this to multi-line so I can at least do something. Multi-line equals true. So I have a really simple text editor. But wouldn't it be nice if somebody could write their own little macro that did something to that? Now, obviously you would have a much nicer UI, you'd have tools, menus and stuff, but just for demo's sake, what I'm going to do is add macro facilities to this application, hopefully in 3 lines of code. So what I need to be able to do is, when I click on edit, I want to launch up a little script editor. So I need a new form. So let's add a new form. And again, let's have a little text box on here. And make that multi-line. And we need a save button. Now, as you can see, my UI skills are somewhat lacking, but and then what I want to add to my project is the Windows Script Control. So add the script control, and I just add it onto. I'm just going to add it onto my main form. Actually, just add it on here. So what I want to be able to do is when somebody types in, this text box here is going to be where somebody types in their script. And when they click save, I want to be able to save that script into the script control so I can then run it later. So before I do that, what I want to be able to do though is say, well, without an object model, script is pretty useless because I could just type some VB script and know nothing about this application. So first thing I have to do is tell the script control about this application. So I can say script control one dot add object, and then I'm going to call this object my editor, and the object I want to add is this text here. So I just say text one dot object, and that text one should do it. So that's now added an object into my script. So I can now say in my script, my editor.text equals whatever I want. So my script control now knows something about my application. In this case, it just knows one object. So in here, so now I have my script control knows about my application. I have to be able to get some way of getting that script into my application. So when a user types in this text, I want to be able to click save, and then it will add that whatever that text is into my script control. So I can say form1 dot script control 1 dot add code, and then I'm just going to say text1 dot text. So now it's going to take whatever text is there and add that. Now in this case, I'm just going to do a simple function, and because this is a demo, I'm going to cheat. On this run, I know in my demo I'm always going to have a function called foo. Now, in my bigger example, there's an easy way for you to find out what functions are available in the script engine, in the script control. But in this case, we'll just cheat a little bit. So I'll say script control 1 dot run, and then it's going to be foo. Okay, so I've just added 3 lines of code to my application. So I click on play. Oh, and the 4th line is, well, I have to say form2 dot show, because I have to be able to show my editor. So if I click on, ooh, look at that. That's interesting. What did I do? Aha. Thank you. Helps if I put that as a string. Okay, so I now have my text, and I can, hello world. Okay, so when I click on edit, it's now going to bring up my other form, and I can just say sub foo and sub, and I can say my editor dot text equals hello from Dallas. Now, just to prove this really doesn't work, I'm going to add 1 line of code here and put stop. And what stop will do is load up the script debugger. So I'm going to click on save, close that form down, and I'm going to hit run and pray that this is going to work. So it's now come up, it's now in hosting script, coming through here, and it's launched in the script debugger. I can now step through this. Whoops. Yeah, continue. Thank you. I can find F8 in the gloom. Set my text to equal hello from Dallas, and it's now changed my text box. So in 3 lines of code, I can add script into my application using the script control. So that's the end of that demo. That deserves a round of applause. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so in summary, script is pretty much everywhere. We've really worked hard to make sure that script is everywhere on Windows. It's simple, both from programming a script itself. It's simple for you to use in other applications. It's pretty powerful as well. We try to make sure that everything you can do in Windows, you can now use script to do. It's lightweight. The script engines themselves are about 300K. The Windows script component runtime's 100K. The script control is about 100K. So we're trying to make it as small as possible. And obviously the most important thing of all is script is integrated into Windows 2000. So where can you get more information? Script also provides something called the file system object. There's a whole presentation on the file system object, which is scary in itself, which is on tomorrow, 9412, using the file system object with VB6. On the web, we have our own website, msdn.com, microsoft.com, scripting, has all the information, have all the demos up there, but right now it has all the binaries so you can get all that information. I also write a monthly column on msdn.com, which somebody decided that Clinick's Clinick would be a great name for that. Unfortunately, it's a terrible name, but hopefully the article's okay. And we have some pretty lively news groups. Scripting. So you go to msnews.microsoft.com and then scripting.bbscript.jscript.wsh. So that's the end of my presentation. I think we've got some time for some questions, so please come to the microphones if you have questions.
Does the encoding work with Perl as well? That little encode thing you had?
Does the encoding work with Perl is the question. Not right now. So the encoding only really works with bbscript and jscript. There's no reason why the Perl guys couldn't do that as well. I mean, it's a reasonably, but not right now. You, I think.
The server-side JavaScript, is any of that, you say it was ECMA compatible or ECMA compliant, will any of that function the way it does on a Netscape server, Netscape web server in IIS?
So the question was, I think, so JavaScript is ECMA compliant. Will it ever work the same way as Netscape's server implementation?
Server-side JavaScript, right.
And the answer is kind of yes and no. The language itself should work in exactly the same way, but Netscape server has a different object model to IIS. So I think it's somewhat unlikely that the object model between IIS and Netscape will kind of merge. So no, basically.
Hi. Does Scripting Host 2.0 require any particular service pack?
Does Scripting Host 2.0 require a particular service pack? So in Beta 1 right now, it does require IE4. So if it whatever the Beta 1 version requires IE4 right now. So whatever service pack that IE4 requires, we require. So in our beta, we've only really tested on SP4 and SP5. So with SP5, you should be just fine. So
next question is, any troubles with running it on terminal server?
Any troubles with... depends. So the question was, are there any troubles running on terminal server? Actually, running it itself, no. Being able to get at some of the information from terminal server, at the moment the object model is not quite there for terminal server. I know that they're trying to fix that, but certainly you can run logon scripts on terminal server with WSH just fine, and so it should work. The only potential issue is debugging, which I don't recommend you turn on in terminal server anyway. But so yeah, it should just work just fine.
Okay, thanks.
With creating COM components with Windows Script, is there any way to define what custom interfaces that that component might implement?
So that's a good question. The question was, is there any way to define custom interfaces for Windows Script components so they can implement whatever interface? Interesting answer. Yes, there is. We haven't finished the documentation on how to do it. So Windows Script components have this notion of interface handlers. So those who are familiar with COM interfaces, most of them are not designed with script developers in mind. So they can present a reasonably complex interface, and also might require non-early automation data types. So what an interface handler allows you to do is basically do a mapping between that interface and provide an iDispatch, which is the only way that script can only talk iDispatch. So basically, it's a piece of software that allows you to provide an iDispatch mechanism of calling that interface. We haven't finished the documentation right now, I'm afraid to say. We really hope to by Windows 2000. We should have a beta out of that documentation in, there's no wood to touch, but in the next month or so.
Okay.
Sorry. So at the moment, no.
When you create the script components, it was done in XML, so there were different tags, and the last one was a script tag.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have to be well formed, or do you have to escape your script code if there's?
That's a really good question. So if I have a script tag and it's XML, so what the hell is going to go on? Because XML, the XML parser, if you have a script with, if X is less than 10 or Y is greater than whatever, it's going to say, oh, there's an X or Y tag. Where's the end of that? So you have to have some way of being able to make that element opaque. So if you use XML mode, and I'll explain what XML mode means in a moment, you have to put a CData within that script block. CData is the way that XML decided, for reasons best known to somebody else. This is the way that you make opaque blocks. Unfortunately, our usability found that a lot of people really didn't understand that, because they were going, well, XML is just HTML with my own tags, right? And, well, kind of, but there's quite a few rules, like it's case sensitive, it has to be quoted. So the Windows Script component and the Windows Script host runtime have two modes. They have full XML compliance mode, and then what I call is kind of do what I mean, not what I say mode, which is a laxer way of doing it. If you put question mark XML at the beginning, then we will go into full XML mode and require CData and be case sensitive. If you don't put that in, then we don't require you to be quoted and case sensitive. Now, there is obvious downsides to that, is that your XML tools won't know how to deal with that, and potentially you can get ambiguous results. But it provides a nice kind of stepping stone so that people can get into this and not fall over the immediate pitfalls of XML.
So if you run the component in XML mode, you go into full. Do you actually parse that document? Does that increase the size of the runtime?
It doesn't increase the size. It just puts our parser into restrictor mode.
It puts the parser into restrictor mode.
Yes.
When you put that CData block, between the script tags, is that anything special you have to do for double quotes?
No. Once you put the CData in, you don't have to escape anything out of your scripts. It's just the XML parser just basically ignores whatever's in there and assumes we know what we're doing with it. So
okay.
You don't have to do anything there.
Thanks.
Can you get to the tree from the XML parse?
Can you get to the tree from the XML parse? That's a very good question. Unfortunately, we cut that feature in order to ship, so no, you can't. I don't know, the guy who was asking about interface handlers can. So if you're an interface handler, you can define your own XML within that interface tag. So if you remember we had a public tag, well, basically that's just shorthand for saying implements type equals automation. And the interface handler for automation can get at that XML tree within it. But from the script right now, you can't do that, I'm afraid.
And if you have in a script component, is there a way to create constants that go in the type library?
So the question was, in the script component, is there a way to create constants to go into the type library? My initial answer would be no, but I'm not entirely certain. I think there's an object model which might allow you to do that. But no, in fact, I know there's not. There's not in WSC version 1. I'm afraid.
Is it planned for version 2?
Anything's planned for version 2 right now. So it will all be fixed in version 2. It'll work twice as fast, be half the size, usual kind of stuff.
Two questions on the exception handling in JScript that you've added. One, is that in the ECMA standard yet, or is it sort of what you see coming?
Okay.
And the second question is there a way to handle exceptions raised through, say, COM components written in Java?
Okay. So the first question was, is exception handling, is that in the ECMAScript standard? Well, it's not in ECMAScript 1.0 because that came out last December. But what we did is we actually designed the exception handling in conjunction with Netscape. So we're working on ECMAScript 2.0, which will be out this December, hopefully if it all works out. And it will be in that. Okay. So ECMAScript 2.0 is basically a standardization of what was in the V4 browsers. So like the switch statement, regular expressions, which is a real fun thing to standardize, and try-catch. So if you look at Netscape's implementation and our implementation, they should be identical. Now, the second part of the question was, can you trap exceptions from COM objects? Absolutely. You can. So if you're developing on the server, that makes a huge difference because now your ASP just doesn't stop. So, and you can actually throw your own exceptions as well. So you can wrap up that exception in whatever kind of object you wanted and provide whatever information and then rethrow that.
Again.
So
good. Thanks.
Two questions. Is the scripting components compatible with the scriptlets beta that you had out originally. And is that a beta? Is the scriptlet components a beta product, or has it been released?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first off, the easy one is Windows Script Components released? I should have said that. Yes, they are released. They release with IE5. So they're available from our website. They were originally called Server Scriptlets, which you saw the beta. We changed the name.
Right.
Because basically scriptlets meant three things. There was scriptlets on IE4, there was kind of these new scriptlets, and then scriptlet was actually a term, if you're familiar with the ActiveX scripting interfaces, was a term for a small piece of script. So we found, funnily enough, that users got confused by that. So we're like, well, we're creating components out of script for Windows, so let's call them Windows Script Components. So that's how the name changed, but they're exactly the same. So if you're familiar with the .sct,
So there's no compatibility problems.
no incompatibility that I know of. Well, it's the same technology, it's just bug fixed on that. So.
All right. And also, I guess one more question: when will Windows Scripting Host 2.0? When do you foresee that being
Windows
released?
Script Host 2.0 will ship with Windows 2000. So whenever Windows 2000 ships, it will be available on the web.
Thanks.
Two questions. Performance differences between a Windows script component and a Visual Basic component on the server. And the other question is VB script versus JScript. Managers level, which one, advantages and disadvantages of each one, independent of developer familiarity, but just from maybe a technical perspective and also from a software engineering perspective.
Okay, so first question I've completely forgotten already. So
The performance differences between...
performance differences. So Windows Script Components doesn't make script any faster. It's still compiled on the fly. It's still late bound. So if you're worried about computational speed, don't use script. Is basically my kind of story on that. But I mean, if you think about it, if you're running a component that's talking to ADO or CDO or whatever, well, the amount of time it takes to compile and run your script is going to pale considerably to how long it's going to take to do that database query. I mean, compiling your script and running it might take milliseconds, and typically a database query doesn't return in milliseconds. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you're talking to a lot of external objects and you're basically kind of gluing those together, then maybe script might be a great solution for you. But if it's ultimate performance that you want, and performance is the key thing to do, then use VB for doing components. But you can't write VB components in Notepad. So there's a trade-off, and some of the ease of use in Windows Script Components, there's a trade-off in some of the speed. So yeah, I mean, VB will typically be faster, but scalability doesn't necessarily mean just speed of execution. Scalability means, well, how many of these can I load in a particular memory set that I have? How many of those, that type scenario? What's the impact of creating a new one? Do I have to load in a bigger runtime? So because these runtimes are pretty small, then you can create very scalable solutions using small components. And certainly if you're doing MTS, you want stateless components. And it's pretty easy to store state in VB. It's reasonably difficult to store state in script. The second question, what are the advantages of using VB script over JScript? Well, hopefully in version 5, then there should be no advantages for features, because we're really trying to make sure that whatever you can do in JScript, you can do in VB script and vice versa. So really it does come down to, like, if you've got a whole bunch of VB developers, and you're doing server-side stuff, then obviously VB script's a great solution there. If you're developing internet client software, so you're doing HTML plus script, then VB script really isn't an option, unless you can guarantee that maybe you're doing like an extranet and it's working, you say you have to use IE, which is fairly unlikely, I guess. So obviously JScript and JavaScript is your scenario there. On the intranet solution, again, really depends on what you want to do. There are definite advantages to be able to have one language that runs on both on the client and on the server. So from a manager's perspective, if you just have to worry about training one set of skills, then that makes a whole bunch of sense. There's more books about JavaScript. It's a standard. If standards really are important to you, then obviously JavaScript is a great way to deal with that. So there's a whole bunch of different things really. if you've got Java, Perl, C developers, then you don't want to try and convince them to use VB first off. Like, break them in gently with JavaScript, and then you can cut and change. And you can use both languages so that they can use either one.
What about extensibility of the language? With JavaScript, is there more flexibility with that or not?
Extensibility, 6 of one, half a dozen the other, I would say, with version 5. Yeah, JavaScript, you've got a prototype-based object system, so you can extend it. You can do, it has inheritance, kind of, which VBScript doesn't have today. We're working on inheritance for future versions. So, yeah, but classes give you something along those lines. Okay, thanks for coming.